Okay, so baking the receiver. So what we have here is our high and low corresponding meshes. I've got the layers for the low meshes and the layers for the high unhidden. So if we simply do a select all and export into the correct folder, let's go with, I'm just going to call it HR Hunting Revolver for short, receiver bake, or whatever, and then export it. Takes a second due to the turbo smooth as well as the high poly meshes. And yeah, we'll just go over to Marmoset toolbag. Again, this is a really good program for baking and as well as presenting your model. I will show how to bake with Substance Painter later on, but I really prefer to bake with toolbag because it just has a few tools such as the paint skewing, which really help. So I'll make a new baker. I did bake in a certain scene before, and I could have loaded that scene and actually refreshed the FBX with, yeah, so I'm going to hit quick load a load the FBX. So what I could have done is open the old scene and actually click this button here to reload. It would also auto reload upon loading the scene probably, but Marmoset's been a bit crashy today, so I'm not exactly sure why that is. But yeah, basically what we want to do is we want to put a good HDRI on. I like to use Juiced Van Hoots HDRI. If you go into Google and just type JOOST HDRIs, then you'll probably find it. It's a free pack of HDRIs which you can just drop into your Sky folder in the Marmoset directory. And Cathedral 3 is usually the one I use because it's even lighting with a few highlights. Just helps to see how the edges are baking better. So I'll hide the high, go to the receiver material which was applied in max, just so it's quicker to just get rid of the albedo and set it to white. Then let's set the samples to 16. I've already showed this, so I'll just go through it real fast. And then we'll make sure we're flipped Y baking, and obviously save that as the default preset so you don't forget. Right, I'll just bake it and see how it goes. Fix any issues if they crop up. Again, the Marmoset is just so much faster than Painter, and there it's applied. We can see there's maybe an issue here. We can see there's a bit of weirdness going on with the knurling, which is this diamond shaped grip. All we'll do is we'll click to open the loader handle group, it looks like. We'll click the low and then we'll increase the max offset of the cage until it's catching that lip. Because if we look at the high poly, you can see that the knurling actually extends out further than the lips extend out further than the knurling does. So all we have to do is expand the cage so that it covers both, like that. Yeah. So any other issues? I think what we have here is, you can see the sharp edge there. What we have here is smoothing groups here as well that don't sync with the UV islands, so we'll need to go back to, I'll just save that scene actually. Save scene, we'll call it. Right, so what we'll do here is we'll hide the highs and then take a look at the UV seams, and you can see that there's no seams here, it's all one continuous island. But the issue is these separate smoothing groups, there's no seam there, but we still have hard edges, which is going to cause smoothing errors. So what we can do as a simple fix is to just use the smoothing groups from UV shells drop down on both of these parts, and then that should rectify it. With more complicated models, you can do the smoothing manually yourself. If I show the standard grip, this mesh only actually has 2 smoothing groups. This is one, and everything else is on another smoothing group. And if you remember what I said, that hard edges have to have UV seams, but UV seams don't necessarily have to have hard edges. This is what I meant. So this has to be a hard edge because of the 90-degree angle that it's creating here, and along here, you know, that's more than a 90-degree angle, because it comes to here and then actually goes back on itself to match the curve. Same thing here. These are all very harsh angles, whereas here we actually have a sort of beveled, chamfered edge, which actually eases the smoothing a lot, and means that the normal map doesn't have to work as hard to smooth this out. So I've manually chosen to only have 2 smoothing groups, half for performance and half because I could just get away with it, and it'll bake fine because of the sort of softness and the chamfering of the model. So take that into account when you chamfer a mesh. So we're going to re-export this out, overwrite the FBX, and then if luck is with me... Oh, I didn't unhide. I was wondering why it was so fast. I didn't unhide the high polys. Right, now this will take a sec. Okay, and yes, it actually it worked. Didn't crash, good. Right, so then all we do is, you can see that the mesh updated because this is basically, it's the updated mesh using the normal map which we just baked. So all we need to do is hit bake again. It'll rebake using the new normal maps, the new smoothing groups, and it should be fixed. Boom, there it is. Awesome. Anything else? Let's take a quick look. So what I'm doing here is I'm clicking at one of the meshes and hitting Control F, which then centers the rotation origin of the camera around that part, just to get a better look. So we're going to need to move these cylinders out. What we need to be careful in Marmoset is camera movements are undoable. So if you keep moving the camera around like this and, you know, keep letting go and rotating it, you have to keep undoing that camera movement every time. So if I show what that means, and I just do this a bunch of times with the camera, you then have to each time you hit Control Z is a camera movement. I kind of wish you could turn it off, but yeah, it is what it is. But yeah, when you're checking parts like this, try and keep a hold of the camera as you're checking, just so you don't unnecessarily add a ton more undos into your undo chain. So yeah, let's check this part. Luckily that isn't the case with 3ds Max. Okay, so yeah, I did do these as separate parts. Are they all on the same smoothing group? They are. Okay, so that should be fine. What you might get sometimes is if you zoom in really close, you can maybe see, again, not sure about the bit rate of this YouTube video, but you can sort of see a bit of a faux line, like a sort of fake highlight there, and that most of the time is the texture. You can kind of see it here as well. Just an unavoidable artifact of texture being displayed on a model with UVs. There's nothing actually wrong with the model, and if you zoom out a bit, you know, you can't see it. That's just the fact of the matter is it's something you need to acknowledge as not an actual problem. I'm just undoing all these camera moves. I did exactly what I said not to actually do. Oh no, I've run out of undos. Okay, what am I going to do? Alright, I'll click on Baker, auto reload. Fixed it, good. And I'll save. Yeah, that's just something to look out for, is these fake seams. They'll be noticeable if they're wrong smoothing groups. You'll be able to notice. So yeah, the normal map looks mostly good. What we'll do is, I should explain UV mirroring in a second because yeah, I forgot to do this face. Everything's a hurry when you're doing a tutorial. What we'll do is we'll hit ambient occlusion. We'll bake that as well. It'll take a lot longer. The normal map usually takes a few seconds, but ambient occlusion takes a while. Okay, save again. And what we'll do is we'll go into occlusion and open the occlusion drop down, and then we can apply the AO map. So an ambient occlusion, ambient obviously means, well, a general area. I don't know the exact definition. Occlusion means to block, and the term together, ambient occlusion, basically means that the type of shadow which appears when objects are sort of close together. That kind of soft, very soft shadow that you get when two objects are in close proximity. Which you can see here, we get a very nice sort of fake depth. It adds a lot of depth to the model, really highlights the crevices. But what we don't want is for it to affect parts of the model which are going to, you know, move. So if the cylinder was to rotate this way, which I don't think it does, you'd see this big shadow here because it's taken this part of the frame, and because it's in close proximity to the cylinder, bake that shadow on. Same thing's happened with this bullet because it's in this dark chamber. That is the amount of shadow that would be, you know, on the bullet in real life, but the fact is it's going to be popping out of the back. Wow, look at the back of that cylinder. If it was popping out the back, then, you know, it'd be completely black and it'd just be really weird. You know, the lighting wouldn't change. So, long story short, to actually fix this, oh my goodness, there we go, good. To actually fix this, all we need to do is go into the low baking group and click exclude when ignoring groups. What this does is it basically considers this part of the model to be a moving part, so it will think, right, I'm not going to bake shadow on this because it could move out of the way. Where's my hammer gone? All this time I think I've had it hidden. Yeah, in 3DS. Some of you more eagle-eyed viewers might have noticed that. Just testing you. And myself. Let's try this again. So I was going to mark the hammer as an excluded group as well. And I'm going to have to rebake everything because the hammer wasn't there. It wasn't present for the initial bake, but that's okay because I need to rebake AO anyway when I change these groups. So yeah, we already have normals and ambient occlusion ticked, so we'll hit bake again. And it'll redo everything. Okay, wonderful. Well, almost. Actually, yeah, that's just the high poly, so I can click the toggle high poly button twice and it goes away. So that's done. If we move the hammer out of the way, then you see that it hasn't baked the shadow there anymore. Actually, the cylinder's a better example because I showed you what it looks like. There we go. It can pop out just fine. And we actually get the ambient occlusion in itself because when it's excluded as a group, it ignores everything else, but it can still bake the ambient occlusion inside itself. Let's see, did we do the bullet? Pretty sure we did because it looks way different. Oh, we didn't actually. I'll have to do another bake. Oh, did I just undo what I just did? Let's find out. Yes, I did. Right. Okay. One more ambient occlusion bake and I think we're done. Always have a habit of hitting Control S to save, just a little habit I have. Obviously in 3ds Max you don't need to be as do it as often, or focus on doing it as often, because auto back will often save you. But yeah, maybe don't rely on it too much. There's often times when I've made changes so fast that I've beaten the auto back 3-minute window and not been able to recover my work because it crashed after I made those changes and I have to do them again, even though, you know, they were quite fast. Right, so yeah, the model looks good, normals look good, AO looks good. Let's save and go back to the mesh, and I'll show you what mirroring UVs is. So here I've decided to use these faces on this side of the frame as these faces as well. So I'm going to use the same UV space that these occupy for this side as well. So that saves on texture space because it's effectively mirroring the UV onto the other side. I could have done it with some of these other faces here, but they're so small that I could have probably, and I did, fit them in just fine. So what I'm going to do is I'll start by cloning the mesh, isolate it, go to face selection, and select just the faces I want to actually keep on the model. Then I'll hit Control I, delete. That leaves me with just the faces. Hit Symmetry, go to the modifier, hit Z, and right click the spinner so that it's in the middle and we're mirroring the mesh. Collapse the modifier, go to Element Select, delete the old faces, and then what we have here is, if I unisolate, on X-ray we have the faces which I want to mirror. And then what I can do is I can attach and then go into Vert Select, select the area, weld it, right click, click this, and I've got 0.01, which is a good weld value. If it was too high, obviously I'd be welding all kinds of stuff, but this value is usually good for welding verts which are on top of each other. So if I hadn't done that, obviously you'd have verts which are just floating. So attaching the mesh is not good enough. It doesn't actually fuse the mesh together as you'd think. It just attaches it as part of one mesh, if that makes sense. It doesn't actually weld the verts together until you weld them yourself. So that's done. So what we'll do is we'll UV edit and I'll select those new faces. And this is what I was talking about, absolute UV coordinates before. What we're going to do is we're going to move them over 1 UV square. And because textures tile, so this texture continues on this way into this square, and continues on into this square and this square and that and that and that, endlessly in all directions. All we really need to do is click here to turn on absolute type in, hit 1, and then that'll move it over exactly 1 space. So if this was a true UV, it would be mirrored this way because that's the true, direction of the island, and it would have to be somewhere in the UV island. But as we're mirroring it, it shares the exact same space UV location, just 1 grid over, effectively. So that will mirror the UV. So if you wanted to move this shell around, you'd probably select this and this at the same time, and then move them both, because you do not want this mesh to go off a bit from this one in the grid, because then it would lose its positioning and would not be mirrored properly, and you'd get some weird stuff like it would start going into the padding zone, and yeah, just look odd. One more thing I wanted to mention. Yeah, so any UVs in this area will be completely ignored by the bake. The bake will ignore any islands which are outside of this UV square. So without further ado, Let's unhide our high polys and export them once more. Oh, yeah. So, as you know, as I've explained before, I think, these low poly meshes have to be triangulated before they can go into the game engine. And right now, they're in quads mostly, you know, quads and some tries. What we should do is select the whole low poly mesh, apply a turn to poly modifier, limit the polygon size to 3. That instantly triangulates the mesh and leaves us with a modifier, which we can, if we want to go back and make changes, delete, make our changes, and then reapply. What this does is, when we bake with this mesh, we then take this exact same mesh, combine it, and put it in the game engine, and then when the normal map applies to this same mesh, we then have the exact same triangulation taking place on both meshes. So both in the baking stage and in the game. So if I didn't have this modifier here and I just exported it, maybe triangulated it this time, 3ds Max would do its own triangulation on the mesh, which would then go into Marmoset, and then it would bake using that iteration, that type of triangulation. Then I'd be back in 3ds Max and export it ready for the game, and the game would do its own triangulation, whether it's through the NIF Tools exporter or me exporting FBX then into 3ds 2013. Something happens along the line which then triangulates it differently, and this is very bad because the normal map sees this mesh, whereas the game sees a different triangulated mesh, and the normal map will no longer fix this, you know, its own unique smoothing on the mesh because it might be triangulated differently. So basically, we want to keep the same. Is it auto-saving or just crashing? It's crashing. No. So this is where AutoBack should save us. If I go to Open and then go to the AutoBack and choose the most recently modified backup, then we should get our files back. Good. And it has the mirrored mesh because it saved that. Good. Scoops. Okay, let's try that again. Okay, I might not have the triangulation applied. No, I don't. So we have the triangulation applied, and then we simply overwrite the FBX with our now newly triangulated mesh. I only really do this after I've fixed all the baking issues because really it's a bit of a pain to apply the modifier and remove it and apply it and remove it every time you want to make changes. Once I know the bake is good, I then triangulate and do a final normal map bake. Save. And so we don't need to bake the ambient occlusion again because that doesn't rely on the triangulation of the mesh. You know, the mesh can be quads to bake an ambient occlusion, it doesn't actually matter. But normal maps do matter a lot. So we'll bake. It doesn't look like anything changed, but this normal map is now perfectly synced with this mesh. And that's good. So yeah, we'll go back to 3ds Max, and then under the combined, I'll make a new layer. This will be for our receiver combined. We'll hide the high, and then we'll clone the receiver and all into the combined layer, hide everything else, give it its own material, as I think I've shown before. Yeah, weird, I don't know why it does that. And then collapse the turn to poly, and then we're safe. We have the triangulation applied, and it can't retriangulate the model in a different way. So we'll hide all the parts which need to move or be separate as their own elements, and then just attach parts together. So that's the speed loader that will be used to put the bullets in and out. This iron sight needs to be attached to these meshes. And finally, everything gets attached to. So I'll just click on the small box next to the attached to bring up the attached list, which allows me to select objects in the scene, and then I'll just shift click, and that connects everything together. We can unhide all. And then we have our mesh, which is ready to be exported into either Nifscape or 3ds 2013. So that's probably what I'm going to be showing next, either the texturing or the actual game implementation.